Will, over to you.
Great. Thanks, Simon. Good evening, everyone. Yeah, my name is Will. I'm based down in the Hamble. I've got a little company called White Dot Sailing, and we help prep people for long distance adventures. So that's things like Atlantic crossings, or it could be even down into the Med from the UK and cruising. So we do everything from sort of Med cruising, Channel crossings, Isle of Scilly to circumnavigations. Um, and as Simon said, I started out. I crossed in 16 actually, and then 17 onwards as a safety inspector. So it's not all the doom and gloom. All these things that I'm going to talk about haven't actually all happened to me. It's a combination of maybe some things that have happened to me in minor forms in my, I think it's about 35,000 miles at the moment of sailing. But every year I check about 30 or 40 yachts. So I think what I've had that's been really interesting is the benefit of a really broad range of people and boats. So people coming into it from not sailing a lot to people that have sailed for a very long time, but it's still their first crossing, from monohulls to pretty racy trimarans and everything in between. So yeah, this is, as I said, it's not all doom and gloom. The aim of this is really to hopefully spark some ideas and some questions in your mind about your preparations and your safety on board. And you may go through the entire presentation and think, well, I knew all that, and I'm doing it anyway, which would be the perfect result. But if you pick one or two things up from it, and you have a few questions at the end, then that's fantastic. I hope we get some strong comments and questions, because that's really good fun after the end of these seminars. So I will crack on. And you should be able to see my screen. So really,
we can see
the
your
first
screen
thing.
clearly. Yep, good.
Brilliant, great. The first thing I was going to talk about is just the idea of planning for the worst, but expecting the best. So all of this safety stuff, I try and get out of the way with the planning early, so it doesn't ruin the latter stages of the prep work. And once you've really sort of prepped for it, I think most people get more confident. So we're going to have a look at sort of 6 of the most critical emergency scenarios that I can think of. If you think of any more, then jot them down, and we'll speak about them after. We'll have a look at each one of how much we can actually plan for in port before we leave, and then what are we going to do, or what could we do if they actually happen to us at sea. And again, prevention is better than the cure in all of these things. So it's better to have a think about it before you set sail again. I think when you're thinking about these scenarios and what you could do, you need to add in flexibility as well. So often, if you're the skipper, and it's the skipper and the owner of the boat that tends to be sort of thinking about these situations the most, just remember that a lot of the time in your mind, you might think that you're the one that's going to save everyone else, or sort of fix the problem, because the knowledge of the boat is in your head. But you could also be the casualty, or also be sort of taken out of the equation. So think about how flexible the plan is with the rest of the crew. And you can't predict the future. So have a think about broad ideas and what would work on your boat, and what things you're going to put on your boat to try and use. But be careful about going into really specific scenarios, because that might not occur quite how you think it would do. And then prep, it's great if you think about a solution and you have all the parts on board and you're pretty confident. Again, if you're the one that's sort of taken out of the equation early on, or it's a scenario where you need multiple things to happen at once, you're like a man overboard, you need to be able to brief all the crew and allocate roles. And these roles, again, need to be flexible if they can be, because, if one specific person's got the job of pointing when someone goes overboard, if they're the one in the water, they're not going to be pointing at themselves. And this all needs to be done ideally before leaving. So you've all had chance to ask questions, practice as well, and role play different scenarios. Again, I think this just adds hugely to the enjoyment of any sort of voyage, because no one's worried about things going wrong, because they're confident that the crew can get it sorted. And I think often in these scenarios, maybe one smaller emergency or one issue can often, if it's not nipped in the bud, lead to a bigger one. So in some of these scenarios, time's of the essence as well. So what we're going to look at this evening is loss of rig, loss of steering, medical emergency, water ingress, MOB, fire. And we're going to have a quick look at abandoned ship, because if it goes really wrong and we've not managed to solve the problem, then whilst it's not an emergency in itself, it's a pretty big deal to do so. So first of all, loss of rig. So pre-departure, I'm coming from a point where we've all had a professional rigging inspection and the rigging's actually sound and it's been passed, in which case I think we should all be competent as skippers and crew to be able to go up a rig and have a good check ourselves. Otherwise, it's going to get pretty expensive over long distances, getting a professional rigger up. So what I often say to people is get a professional rig check, make sure the rig is sound, go back up yourself straight away, take a load of pictures. If you're not that hot on rigging or the components of rigging, at least you can compare pictures. A picture of something that you know is good, and then you take a picture and you think, oh, that doesn't look as good. Then you're spotting a problem early. You might not know how serious an issue it is, but it's something that you can show for comparison to a professional. So the rig should be tuned, and we can do things like checking all the split pins. So this was one on a safety check years ago on I think the chain plate connection on a cap shroud. So that would have been quite serious if that was worked loose. And there's little things you can do as well as inspect swages for corrosion, pitting, cracks. So stainless steel, especially in hotter climates, you'll start to get crevice corrosion if your sort of metal's heating up over 50 degrees, which is quite easy to do nowadays in warm locations. And a huge one as well is running rigging chafe. I think that's probably the biggest rigging issue that you are likely to encounter. I did a quick calculation to try and impress this on people on a talk that I was doing a while back, and I calculated if a halyard was moving over a sheave at the top of the rig 5 millimeters a second as you're offshore sailing along, which I think is reasonable, over a 20-day crossing, that halyard over the sheave would move over 8.5 kilometers of travel. So if you've got any tiny issues with the sheave or the wear in the jacket of the halyard, you're gonna end up losing a halyard. So pre-checks are really important. Using things like a microfiber cloth over standing rigging. If you can't quite visually see it, then it's going to hook under the bits of wire, and you'll be able to feel rather than see maybe that there's an issue with your standing rigging. I think a long way of preventing issues on long distance is setting up a rig preventer and a spinnaker pole if you're poling out. So I read an article actually in Yachting Monthly, I don't know how long ago it was, of a New Zealand boat, 60 foot, where the preventer failed and it ended up with rig failure. And they did a calculation on the angle of the preventer. So a lot of people properly run a preventer as far forward as they can and then back. But we're seeing nowadays a lot more running from the middle of the boom or to a mid-cleat on the large boats where there's mid-deck cleats. And the calculation went something like the actual angle of the preventer from the boom was on a 6-degree angle to which at 35 knots produced a load of over 4.5 tons. If that angle had been 27 degrees, which was the maximum angle they would have been able to gain, that load would have reduced to just over a ton. So about a quarter of the load. So rigging things up properly and understanding the loads before you leave, I think is really good for preventing rig failures. And if you're on a catamaran, you've got to think about how you're going to prevent that boom from accidental jives, given that the angles aren't quite as good with the swept-backed spreaders and the backstays. Boom brakes are okay if you know how to set them up and you set them up correctly. We've got a picture here. This was a boat we set up this year that's on a world circumnavigation. This was our first time poling out. We actually shortened the length of the preventer of the spinnaker pole here so that it jutted right up against the extra sheet, so we could reduce the sheet moving around on the end of the pole and reducing chafe. So another example here, good position right at the back of the boom. Although watch out for knots, because knots can reduce the safe working load up to about 40% on some lines. So if you're going to use a knot, factor that into your line size. Not a great position is center of the boom. That'll induce a load in the middle if there's a jibe, and it'll snap the boom in half. And we see a lot of proper blue water boats having like a folding pad eye or something at the very back of the boom with a dedicated preventer line. This is really good because it means that you're connecting the other part of the preventer line around the shrouds, which means that you're still quite safe clipped on. So if you do get a preventer in the middle of the boom and you do get an accidental jibe and there's some movement in there, you have the risk of snapping the boom in half. And then also ripping the main as well. So that could be an issue. So think about preventer setup. So this is all prevention rather than an emergency at sea. We're trying to prevent it before we have it yet. If there is a problem with your boom at sea, this is a picture from Chris Tibbs, who's done quite a lot of circumnavigations, racing and cruising. He went out in the Solent one day years ago and set up his boat, and he's actually got a spinnaker pole hidden in here with a reef on his slab reef main, and he's jury rigged a main sheet and a bit of a preventer there, and it works. So you need to be having to think about your setup and effectively it's what could go wrong, and what have I got on board to deal with it, and what might a plan start with. If you have problems with the standing rigging, so it's all past your rig check, but inevitably things go wrong at sea. We need to be thinking about what we can actually do at sea to save a rig. So assuming that you found something with a shroud or a stay that's accessible, we've got various options. We've got an example here of using a spare length of wire over maybe an issue with some strands going of the wire in the swaged fitting. So here we've alternated with a bulldog clamp either side, and then more so where the damage is. And notice how we can use these bulldog clips on the bottle screws as well. So they will go around there as long as you get the right size. So make sure you've got the right size diameter bulldog clips. We could use spare halyards and either tighten on the winch or use something like a Spanish windlass, where we can get a winch handle or a bit of something in between the two lines if you loop it around, and then create tension that way. There are actually some really interesting things on the market, things like the blue wave fittings, which allow you to put Dyneema in one end and then actually match your the fitting that will go onto the mast. So this is quite helpful, I think, because rather than carrying loads of wire around, which would be quite heavy and take up a lot of space, you could actually carry a reel of Dyneema as well, and then put the correct fitting on if you were trying to make some fixes at sea. I think there's a risk of just using a halyard that if you tension it too much and it's coming off a sheave at the wrong angle, you can effectively just crush the sheave and do more damage, although less damage than your rig coming down. For things like goosenecks and booms, ratchet straps are really helpful, and you can actually get stainless steel versions of these. They might not carry quite the same load as the mild steel versions, but for what you want them for, they're quite useful. So things like keeping the inboard end of the spinnaker pole, the track, if that starts to peel away from the mast that we've seen, it's quite a common problem. You can use a ratchet strap to keep to above and below where that fitting is to keep the track on, or even the gooseneck as well. And if we do have a problem at sea, we're trying to immediately make the problem the leeward side, so it's under low load. and dropping the sails as well is also helpful. If we do have an issue with the rig and it's completely failed and it's in the water, then we need to think about cutting away. So what sort of tools have you got on board in an emergency to cut the rig away? I think first of all, it's trying to save the rig. Or save parts of the rig that you might be able to use to carry on sailing and avoid damage to the hull at the same time. So if spreaders are knocking into the side of the hull and threatening to puncture the hull, then obviously getting the rig away quicker is the right thing to do. This is one of those scenarios where you probably can't role play the exact thing that's going to happen. You might end up with some of the rig, none of the rig, nothing savable. So it's all about thinking about different scenarios and what you could use of the rig and the tools on board that might help you. So not one size fit all situation, I'm afraid. If you do have a rig failure, it's important to detach the stays and shrouds that aren't under load first. Otherwise, you just knock one out and then the next one comes under load. So it's these sort of things in your head, thinking about beforehand, before any panic sets in, is a really good idea. And above all else, crew safety as well. So making sure that the crew is safe before you come up with a plan. So we've got a really interesting picture here, not mine, not a boat that I know, but has been passed down to me of a boat. I presume this is a keel-stepped rig because it's just got what I can see as a jury rig backstay up, and they're using what looks like a jib of some sort as a mainsail. I would guess that they've taken a few goes at this. This might take a couple of days to set up. So they've got all the equipment on board, but they've never experienced this before. So I think planning and then doing and then reviewing, this might be version 3 or 4, but it looks like it's definitely going to take them somewhere. So luckily, most of us sail the right way around the world, and we've got trade winds behind us. So as long as you can get up some canvas, I think you'd in this scenario, you'd be okay. If you've got a deck step mast, then you've got to come more to the conclusion that you're probably going to lose most of your rig if you have shroud failure or something similar. Whereas if you've got deck steps, you might have a bit left. Again, rest the crew. While you're going through all these procedures, just keep an eye on fatigue and morale and how the crew are, and take time to do it safely. I'm cutting the rig, especially with the rally stuff. We see lots of different versions of how people might think to cut the rig. Generally, they often go with a cheaper version, and I think there's a direct correlation between cheaper and less effective. So we see a lot of just hacksaw blades and hacksaws, sometimes even junior hacksaws. That's going to take a long time to cut a rig, especially it's going through stainless. So really have a think about whether that's appropriate. Lots of rusty general bolt croppers in the bottom of lockers. Are they actually going to work? The action, first of all, and how sharp are the blades going to be? Some maybe more specific higher end cutters are these Felco cutters here, but even that largest version will only cut up to 8mm wire. And those of us sailing on sort of larger boats, 50-foot plus, I doubt your shrouds are going to be 8mm, more like 10, 12 and above. So have a think about whether, and they're probably about 350 quid as well as pounds. So, have a think about whether they're fit for purpose. Most commonly now we see angle grinders, which is great. Make sure you've got the right blades for stainless and cutting. And then think about PPE as well. So your protective goggles and gloves as well should be in there. And if you are going battery powered, make sure the batteries are actually charged and you've got some spare ones as well. So you should have all this kit packed somewhere and ready to go. And it needs to be specific with your boat. So loss of steering, another critical component on the boat. I think quite a few people that I speak to maybe don't understand every single component of their steering system, especially if it's a new boat to them. So I think, as with any component, it's really critical to understand each component, check your system, And then one part of your steering system is always the emergency steering. So your emergency tiller that you're inserting into one or the other, or depending on how many rudders you have, top of the stocks. I find most of these from the factory aren't probably adequate. They probably need a bit of remedial work. There's normally a lot of movement where it comes through the deck, and that needs to probably be secured better. We've done 3D printing, sort of little bearings, collars that go around the emergency steering system. I think you've got to think about the manufacturers probably do it to pass the RCD, the recreational craft directives, but we might need them for much more long distance. So we tend to beef them up a little bit, put some eyelets in the end of the tiller, so we can actually take some lines to winches and cleats. So we're not actually going to hand steer for thousands of miles. We're more likely just to use some mechanical force like a winch. So make sure that the crew understand that, and you modify where you need to. So understand what equipment on board could be used to jury rig your rudder. So if it's a rudder issue and not a steering issue, then you need to know, what's feasible. What can I do to keep steering the boat ultimately 1,000 miles? And I think from what I've seen, all of these rallies that are finishing up, some level of issue with steering, whether it's the rudder or actually more likely just the steering system within the boat. It's one of the more common emergencies on board. When I crossed in 16, we lost our steering cable about 3 days out from the Caribbean. So it does happen. So think about spares, redundancy, how you can bypass your systems. That's really helpful. So if you've got a steering system similar to this, and don't worry if yours looks different, think about where the autopilot is. If it's directly onto the quadrant and the rudder, then anything after that, like the steering gear or the wheel or any bearings, if they fail, you can still work on autopilot. If autopilot is integral into the wire, or it's on chain and then wire, then if you lose your steering cables, you're going to lose your autopilot as well. So just think about what you might lose. I think you should take your autopilot off every watch and hand steer, just in case you feel any stiffness or anything that feels different. If you're changing your standing rigging, I often change the wire at the same time, because as it goes around the sheaves, it work hardens. So again, we're thinking about preventing emergencies at sea. Changing wire is difficult. It depends how intense your sailing is, how loaded up you sail the boat, what sails you're sailing with. If we go blue water cruising, we tend to load the boat up with a lot more spares. So the waterline lowers, the drag increases, and then we'll put in more pressure on things like the hull, the keel, and the rudder. So the steering system work hard. Some people say 10 years. If you're long distance cruising, it might be 3 to 5. I've seen some older Moody's that have the encapsulated wire in a stiff outer cable. So they don't actually go around sheaves. They go just within their own conduit, as it were. So they're going to last much longer because the stainless isn't actually, doing 90-degree turns. And this was on a more recent boat, I think a Beneteau, that I was involved with, or still am involved with. So they've got a combination of wire on and then a track system with 2 bars to their rudders. So they're all different, and it's just working out your own system. And if you understand that, you're more likely to diagnose a problem in an emergency at sea and know how to rectify it because you've got the right spares. So a couple of problems that I've seen over the last couple of years: steering wire failure, and so that's work hardened and then just snapped over the sheave. Autopilot pins coming out of quadrants, probably because the boat was overloaded and maybe being sailed too hard in heavier seas, and it's just ripped out the quadrant, and we've got a pretty beefy fix at the end there. If you're going to fix part of the system, just be aware that you might just move the weak point somewhere else in the system. Steering failures, I think, is one of the things where we see quite a bit of next emergency, as it were. There was a couple of years ago, I heard of a boat where the steering system failed as someone was going down a companionway, and they ended up falling down and breaking their leg. So think about accidental jibing and what the boat's going to do after the steering failure. So there might be an immediate procedure that you might think of if the autopilot fails or if any part of the steering fails and you're wing on wing, make sure that your crew know maybe to release the head sails so that the boat will hopefully naturally round up into wind rather than crash jibe and create another problem. So you want to think about these scenarios as they happen and don't jump ahead to how you fix the problem. It's probably sometimes about, first of all, how you can stop the situation getting worse. So outside the boat, we've got rudder, bearings, stock and tube, and blade. So these are going to be harder to fix. And again, going to the stopping the situation getting worse, first of all, if you've got a problem with your stock, a lot of boats nowadays don't have watertight aft sections. So they don't have a watertight bulkhead in front of the steering system. So if you have a problem with your stock or tube or the rudders come loose, then, immediately you might be thinking about water ingress, stopping the boat and making sure there's no water ingress, rather than immediately going to how you're going to fix the steering situation. If you bob around for a couple of hours or a day, then it's not going to be too much of a problem. Total rudder loss. I think this is interesting because as we go further away from likelihood of things happening, I find that, and myself included, we probably think about those issues less, but the more, not catastrophic, but the more sort of total system failure that we might have, we might need more extra stuff on board. So things like if you had total rudder failure and you had a single rudder, what would you do to be able to still steer the boat? So there's various options out there that people have successfully used, but you have to make sure it's right for your boat as well. So there could be an amount of testing. I did hear of one guy in the US actually physically take his rudder out the boat so he could test a steering drogue. I think we're more likely to get up to that point, lash the wheel and see if we can steer with a straight rudder. So something like a drogue setup might work. And there's lots of information about drogues out there. The classic is the old, I'm going to take a sole boarder, I'm going to take the heads door and strap it to a spinnaker pole. And again, Chris and his wife years ago did actually try this in the Solent. And I think it's a pretty cool effort. They've obviously thought about it. I wonder whether you could go 1,000 miles, certainly not hand steering like that. So I think this might be version 1. And then the next version might be, how can we mechanically use that pole or lash it in a straight line and sail with balance? Can we sail with balanced sails? So, I think there's an amount of theoretical stuff and then an amount of practical stuff. We're probably never going to 100% know if certainly things like this would work unless we completely took the rudder off. But I think the closer you get to a solution, the less you have to work out in an emergency, and the more confident you are going to be that you can fix the issue. So moving on, medical emergency. This one section is going to be relatively short because I'm not a doctor. So, and I think most of us will be in this situation. So it's probably pertinent that I do it this way and get us thinking about it. And certainly with the rallies and more inexperienced people, medical ends up going further down the line and not thought about until the last minute. But, again, it could be quite serious. So pre-departure, ship's medical kit needs to be well stocked in date. First aid book, drug descriptions, understood by all the crew. They know where it is, get familiar with the kit. If you can, there are professional, they do cost a bit, but there are professional companies out there that will put these together and train you up on them. So you can do, in the UK, some MCA courses that are 4 days long, rather than the 1 day first aid courses that we're most likely to do through work. I think asking your crew to declare any physical or mental medical issues before you leave will help you, certainly as a skipper, prepare and maybe reorientate, the kit that you've got on board, or double up on stuff that you might use a bit more. Think about allergies to medication as well. And encourage crew to alert if you're the skipper, really early, so the situation doesn't get worse. Things we can do as kind of normal, lowly, non-doctor medical people on boat. I always say pre-program into your SATCOM system MRCC numbers for your country, your flag, and often there'll be one number for kind of emergencies, and there'll be another one for as a medical hotline as well. So if you can get a couple of those plugged in, that's really helpful. Establish who in the crew has the most medical training. I always ask this as part of some of the safety checks when I'm out in Las Palmas. And I've had various responses. I was talking to one guy for about 5 minutes who said he was a surgeon, and he wasn't being very forthcoming with his training and what he could do. And I said, so what sort of surgeon are you? And he said, oh, I'm a tree surgeon. So I thought, okay, right, fine. He was pulling my leg for about 5 minutes. He was pretty good. He'd be pretty good at chopping someone's leg off, but actually knowing much about medical stuff was minimal. So make sure you know everyone's level of medical training before you get the chainsaw out. And again, I think prevention is better than the cure. This sort of spreads out to wearing life jackets, shoes on deck, gloves, PPE. Everyone's got their own attitude to risk. So I'm not going to go full RWA or MCA on everyone, but just know that, there's relative risk, and you probably want to try and match that with medical kits and emergencies that you might have. So if you're not going to wear shoes around the deck, you might split your toe open. So keep plenty of bandages and some antiseptic cream. But just a reminder of things that we need to do. So this would be covered in our first aid, one-day first aid courses, ABC, so the airway, breathing, circulation, immobilize if you need, and think about what you could use on board to immobilize people. So soul boards, paddle boards, head stores. That head store is going to get a lot of use. Anything that makes an effective back brace. Most of our first aid courses, the one-day ones, they're all about stabilizing the casualty before the ambulance arrives. In the middle of the ocean, that's going to take a bit longer, which is why I think, we should all have a little bit more medical training so that we can actually effectively administer some medical help rather than just wait for it. Again, who in the crew has medical training, and then SATCOM's call for medical advice. So I wouldn't just mention on that one, seeing a lot of Starlink installations nowadays. I've just come back from a trip from across the Caribbean Sea from St. Lucia to Panama on a boat. Starlink was on the entire time. It was absolutely brilliant for communication and weather, but it's not linked into the GM DSS system. So it's not in your emergency system like a sat phone is. So I often say to people, if you're going to have a Starlink, then I would have a sat phone charged up in your grab bag ready to go. So if you are wanting to call MRCC, great, call on Starlink and via WhatsApp if you want to. But if there's any issue with that, or it's booting up, or you're low on power, you've got a proper link with a sat phone straight to help. Okay, water ingress. This incidentally is a couple of boats having some water ingress issues just on the northern entrance to the Panama Canal that I took last week. So yeah, a couple of issues going on there. I'm a big fan from Coding Boats of a ship's diagram that's showing all the seacocks or through-hole fittings and the locations of the water ingress kit. So again, it's easy if you are giving a crew briefing to use diagrams rather than sort of going, oh, well, it's under that floorboard there or that floorboard there. And I've seen some really good laminated copies of these. And I think the best places are the back of the head stores, because what else are you going to do while you sat on the heads every single day? You've got nothing else to read. So if you put all the safety kit laminated on the back of the head store, I reckon by day 3, your crew are going to know where every through-hole fitting and every fire extinguisher are on the boat. So that's a really good way of sort of educating. Things work loose, so ideally double clipping and checking those clips every now and again. So these are good examples here. We've got the through hole, then the ball valve, and then the 90-degree turn, double clipped onto the pipe, going wherever it needs to go. So watch out for debris in the bilges as well. Getting sucked up if your pumps are actually trying to do a job. And I always suggest bilge alarms. So it's up to you whether you put a float alarm, a high level float alarm on a low level float alarm, or what I think is quite good is an alarm that's directly integrated into your bilge pump, so that when your bilge is actually activated, your bilge pump, immediately you're going to get like a piezo high frequency alarm that you can hear from anywhere on the boat. Otherwise, if it's particularly quiet or deep bilge, or there's a lot of wind outside, your pump could be going for an hour before anyone goes down below it and hears it going on. So bits of kit that we might use. There's a couple of schools of thought on bungs, whether you tie them to each through-hole fitting. If you do, make sure that they're high enough, because they're softwood and they're meant to expand when they get wet. If they've got wet already, they've already expanded, so they won't be as effective. Make sure you've got a mallet. The other option is to have a really good stowage plan and keep them all together. And then you take the right size bung for them, and put it in the right size hole. And then for our larger ones like heads and engine exhaust outlets, things like that, we've got these really good rubber sort of spongy ones that are graduated that you can just shove in. They're really helpful. You tend not to need a mallet for that one. So for anything larger than probably 2-inch, something like that. Stay afloat putty is quite useful. And then we've and make sure that that's everyone knows where that is. So some of the causes that we've looked at before, internally, we've got through holes, we've got sort of rudder stocks here. So sometimes if a bearing fails, it can start moving the whole of the stock, and the stock splits and you get some water ingress there. So that's where things like the stay afloat putty might work better than the bung. And then shaft seals as well are a common one, especially things like the face seals, like a PSS. If that's been sat for a while and the two faces are not perfectly put together, or they're only held in by a couple of grub screws. So if they're not taut correctly and they slip, then you can get water ingress from there as well. So be aware of any potential areas that can cause issues. And another one, especially on catamarans, is emergency hatches. So we've got this one in the external one, so collision impact or keel issues. So that's pretty horrific. So just be aware of where your crash zones are, where your watertight bulkheads are. So on catamarans, there's normally a couple right on the bow, which are quite useful, up to about 6 foot back. And you can stow things in those, but effectively they make really good crash zones, and often the drainage through the bottom of those has a ball valve on that you can close. So keel would be another issue. You can see the catamarans have the emergency escape hatches on the bottom. The older models, especially, relatively common failure. Things like these glass holders are quite good for an emergency repair, when you put that on the inside of the perspex and then use a line to pull it tight, or using things like marine ply that's been had a 2-part epoxy paint applied over it. You can use over the top and then use a long bar on the inside and secure it that way. And then this is probably one of those scenarios where you've got a couple of things maybe going on at once, depending on the amount of water coming in. So whilst you've got a number of crew finding the water coming in and looking at all the through-hole fittings that are memorized while they've been sat in the toilet, you might actually have 1 or 2 dedicated people getting the life raft ready just in case, or calling other boats or MRCC for a pan or a mayday. So this is where you need multiple people doing multiple things at once. So some sort of rough plan is quite helpful. So small leaks can get bigger, much quicker than you'd like to think. Taste and trace, I'll leave this entirely up to you. I had this once, and just in the Solent actually, where a freshwater tank had had burst a pipe, or its pipe had come off, and we were on one tack, and it was filling up one part of the boat, but not in the bilge. We tacked over, and probably about 50 litres plus went straight into the bilge, set off the bilge alarm, so we heard it from the cockpit. I went down and just saw this torrent of water, and that wasn't a nice thought, but I just instinctively put my finger in it because it looked quite clean, and gave it a taste, and it was completely fresh. So I knew we weren't sinking. And the next problem was turning off the freshwater pump and then pumping out all the water. But I knew, fairly early on that we weren't actually going to sink. So I didn't start running around the boat trying to work it out. So it does work. High capacity pumps as well. So I think a lot of the pumps that are delivered with new boats nowadays are probably under spec and you could fail. So high capacity pumps are really helpful. You can get these quite cheap from hardware stores that might be on the main system, a 230 volt or 110 volts. But if you've got a generator on board that's quite high and you start that up, it's probably the best way of evacuating water from a boat, and one of the cheapest options as well. Alerting MRCC, as we said, and then split crew between searching and control and the flood and readying the life raft. Okay, man overboard. So I think trade wind sailing is quite interesting because certainly the lower levels of an RWA course, we nicely concentrate on close reaching or beam reaching. If you've got time, you might do a broad reach or a downwind man overboard. And I think if you're doing trade wind sailing, that's the most likely scenario you're going to have. If someone falls overboard, you're going to be going downwind with a spinnaker or pole down. So really thinking about how to stop that boat is quite important. Boats are getting faster. We're all liking to cruise at a higher speed. Worth remembering that at 6 knots, in 10 minutes, the casualties are a mile away. And even if they've got a life jacket on, they're going to be head and shoulders. So if you've got a meter swell or a 2 meter swell and they're a couple of waves back, they're going to start getting hard to spot, and you're going to lose them every sort of 5 or 6 seconds, depending on the swell period. So I think, again, prevention, life jacket and safety line. I always wear a life jacket, especially at night. Even if it's rough, I've got a safety line on. We prep a lot of our boats to have jack stays running outside the decks as usual, along the aft section if they're quite wide, and then in the cockpit as well, so you can clip on straight away as you come out the saloon. Life jackets ideally want to be ocean and blue water ready, so 175 newtons plus, inbuilt harness, spray hood, tape, reflective tape, whistle, light that's in date, manual auto inflate, again, that's in date, and then have a decision on whether you're using a cartridge, which is salt water. As soon as it gets submerged in salt water, it's going to go off, or pressure. So it works like a hydrostatic release on a life raft. So this can be different depending on the boat that you're on. I know some of the old clipper boats that are still run commercially, they switched to pressure, the hammer setup, because every time they went forward, got a wave over the deck and the life jackets got wet, it would inflate. So they went to a pressure system rather than a cartridge system. And then it's a good idea to name your life jacket. So put your name on it so you know it's yours. If you get a lot of crew changing, then use a crew number and assign it and write it in a logbook. And then I'd always put my boat name and another identification, so call sign or MMSI. So if anyone picks up a life jacket and either it's just a life jacket or the person in it isn't fit to respond, they'll know where it's come from. Nowadays, we've got some great advances in technology. So things like the AIS MOB system that goes into a life jacket, they're absolutely brilliant. But, they've got to be set up right around the bladder to actually automatically get going once the life jacket's inflated. Their max range is about 5 miles in good conditions, in ideal conditions. And they do need to be tested every now and again, so read the instructions on those, and then you can actually get ones now that you don't have to activate. You can test the battery using using your mobile phone in an app on using near field technology, or communication as they call it. So I think there's a lot of preventative stuff we can do about MOB, not just thinking about what would the first steps if someone goes overboard. There's some cool life jackets out there now. I don't know if you've heard of a company called Timo. They started out because they lost a friend on a channel race overboard with a spinnaker out, and they actually drowned being tethered to the boat. Most life jackets, if you fall in with the tether on, you'll be face down because your feet will go behind you and you'll be pulled face down. They designed a what's called a back tow system that actually flips you on your back, so you're still attached to the boat, but you flip around. So the tether connects to the front of your life jacket, but when you fall in, it releases, flips around, so you're actually towed on your back. They patented that. And so Spinlock came up with their quick release system. So that's another version of the same thing. Although with them, you actually release yourself from the boat completely then. So two things have to happen there. One, you lose your connection with the boat, and two, you have to be conscious to be able to pull that manually. So have a look at sort of these new developments in life jackets. I think they're pretty pricey, but they're worth the investment in my eyes. So just reviewing kind of our first steps if we did have someone go overboard, and this is straight out of the RWA playbook, but it works, but it's not the be all and end all, so you need to adapt it to your boat, your crew. If you're single-handed, well, you're not going to shout and point. If you're double-handed, you're either the person on board or in the water, and you either see them or you don't need to alert anyone else. So think about how it works for your boat. And then whatever your MOB equipment that we'll look at in a minute, so dam buoy and horseshoe buoy over the side, and that'll act, even if it's not so close to them, it'll act as a marker. So things like the dam buoys or horseshoe, if they've got a small drogue on them, then they'll stick pretty well to where they get thrown in. They'll just be current as well. Other crew, split some roles up, but again, keep it flexible. So who's hitting the MOB button on the chart plotter to stick a waypoint in, who's calling the DSC Mayday, and then take a minute to understand the situation. So you need to think about how your sail setup and weather is actually going to dictate how you stop the boat. So if you've got a couple of these pre-programmed into the crew's mind, it's going to be an easy selection rather than having to decide on the day. I had an interesting one with the MOB button, which on the chart plotter, which is really helpful. A skipper told me a couple of years ago that he went to do this with his crew inshore in port, which was really helpful. And he pressed the button, and the message came up and said, "You've run out of waypoints on your computer, on your chart plotter. Please clear some." So it was a really good, scenario where he's going through the motions of what would happen in an MOB procedure and testing them. And then he found out that the weak link was, if he'd have done that at sea in an emergency, it wouldn't have dropped a waypoint because he'd run out. So he cleared the waypoints and then it was all good. So you need to test these theories as well. And we're aiming to turn the boat back towards hopefully the AIS target if you've got one on your life jacket once under control, so you're not adding more issues. Getting a person out of the water in mid-ocean is going to be extremely difficult. So you need to practice with whatever systems you have. So it's difficult for me to go through this now, but I think every boat that we try and work with and prep, we take a while, we break it down. So there's the recovery or getting back to the person, stopping the boat, getting back to the person. And then a separate scenario almost is how are we going to get this person back on board? And it's going to be different with monohulls, multi-hulls, freeboard, transoms and how they are, if it's a sugar scoop or a drop down swim platform. Every boat's going to be different, and it's about thinking about how you're going to get back to the casualty and get them on board. So in emergency, we've got DSC buttons, voice mayday, sat phone, and remembering that Starlink isn't part of the GMDSS system. So I normally have that in my grab bag ready to go. The sat phone, you can always get it out in an emergency. If you can't find them quickly, then you go back to the waypoint and start a search pattern. If there's other vessels in range, then hopefully they can come over and search. And again, thinking about the idea that you're going to be saving the crew, but what if you're in the water as well? There should be some procedures that we tell the crew, what if you fall in? So if it's in the Atlantic or somewhere nice and warm and the ocean temperature is sort of above 20 degrees, you're going to survive. Cold water shock is probably not going to be the death of you. So it's things like trying not to panic, don't try and swim, conserve your energy. If you've got no life jacket, then it's pretty slim odds, but float to survive, like the RNLI say. Consider your visibility, double checking if you've got your AIS MOB kit and it's actually working, knowing what it looks like when it's working, what lights are flashing, what sequences, whether it's actually picked up its GPS information, whether it's transmitting, whether the antenna's unraveled completely. There's lots of things to think about if you're the one in the water, for your personal preservation. There's sea survival courses and offshore safety courses out there, or you just go online and sort of hoover the information up yourself. But I think the point is that you think about it and you prepare about it and you brief and you talk about it to the crew. And then if it did happen, even under stress, you've hopefully got a good idea of what to do. And then you're maximizing chances of successful retrieval. So downwind MOB, I think there's a lot of potential here to make a situation worse, especially with a spinnaker or a pole out. So make sure if you're dropping it, then the crew are smooth. Don't rush it. Drop the spinnaker or furl it in before you turn upwind. Otherwise, really, you're just going to add issues to the whole scenario. Releasing things like releasing sheets and not having knots in the end of sheets and sheets that are flaked, so they'll run quickly. So you can basically bleed off speed really quickly, even if you're not going in the right direction yet. Practice these maneuvers with one less crew, because if there's going to be a person in the water, an MOB, then there's going to be naturally one person less on the boat. So this is really important if you're double-handed or short-handed. You only got 3 crew maybe, and then remember that one of those might be off watch, so they're coming back onto a situation that they've only just woken up, they've heard someone shouting. So factor all of this in, and this is where we practice and drill. You don't have to do it often, just every now and again. Make sure all lines are on board before the engine's on. It's critical things like that. If you get a line around your prop in something like this sort of emergency, then it's going to be, it's not going to be great. And then think about, when you're going to search for someone in the water, how are you actually going to do it? There's a couple of ways of doing it, and I'd recommend sort of reading up on it, maybe having a printout on board. Things like the expanding square search. So that's quite a good box pattern. Often check your chart plotter, because even some of the older versions have within them the ability to set up a search. So you can find these searches within your chart plotter, and if you've put an MOB waypoint in, they will start the box search, or as we're going to see next, the creeping line search and parallel line search. They can actually start it from that waypoint, so you can go back to that waypoint, and if you still haven't found them and they're not up on an AIS, you can actually use your chart plotter. So rather than having to do it manually, you use chart plotter 8, but you need to know where it is and how to use it, and have practiced it. So get familiar with various types of search. And another option is the creeping line search, or parallel line search. So this is quite good if you know which way the drift is. So in the Atlantic, if you've got current and you know which way it's going, you know which way the wind's going, then it's quite a good option as well. And remember that it's still a rough search, so you want eyes and ears, all points of the compass, really, all directions. MOB retrieval systems, we've got all sorts here. We've got from the very expensive John Boy units, where they actually really are pretty good and really quick to deploy. And we've got sort of inflatable horseshoe and dam buoys with a drogue. And then getting people back on board, handy billy systems, and sort of helicopter strop sort of systems. We've even got ladders. If you're hoisting people off the boat, think about how you're going to do it. If you're going to do it off a sheave, there's a potential, if that line's going 90 degrees, to skip off the sheave and drop down the side of the sheave, and then the line gets fixed, and then you've got a casualty either in the water or halfway out the water. So if you've got a spinnaker halyard that's got a flip-flop block or an actual block at the top, that would be a much better halyard to use, because you're not likely to jam it up. So thinking about your equipment on the boat and next to them. So there's probably a reason for that, but not knowing that, I would say, fire blanket for galley fires. And also, I think this is a little bit too close to the source of the fire. If that's quite hot and quite high and you're reaching for a fire blanket, maybe have it close to the galley but not in the galley, and then you can not add burns to the problem. So it's thinking about where you're placing your equipment as well. So that MOB equipment wants to be on the back rail, not too crowded, so you can get it in the water pretty quickly. Again, something for the back of the head store, nicely laminated, so you can stare at it while you're sat on the loo. All crew will be familiar. Do you have enough fire extinguishers? Is there a large extinguisher in the cockpit? And then think about escape routes, muster points. You may need 2 muster points and 2 escape routes if your engine is, like most boats, below the companionway. So if that's on fire, you're probably not going out of that route. Meet at the point where with all fire extinguishers possible. So this is, again, crew drills. 3 out of 4 people come on deck and they've not got a fire extinguisher in your hand. You might only have a cockpit fire extinguisher to put the fire out. So practice your drills. Understand how they work as well. So there's different ways of doing them. There's a classic sort of pull the pin, squeeze the trigger, and aim at the base of the fire. And then there's ones here that might have a release handle and on immediately is obvious. Going to kind of amounts on board, I like to go off things like MCA coding, although that's just changed. If you're on a commercial Cat 2 boat up to 60 miles offshore, you'd have a powder extinguisher in each cabin, one in the saloon, an auto in the every machinery space, and a larger 4 kilo in the cockpit. So that gives you an idea of on a sub sort of what would it be, 24-meter boat. That's what you might need. And it's worth remembering that a 2 kilo fire extinguisher powder might have a 15 to 30 second discharge time. So think about adding all your fire extinguishers up. If you can get to all of them in time, how much discharge time you've actually got. And showing people how to use fire blankets as well. So again, lots of prep. And then think about knock-on effects as well. So if you've got autos in your engine bay and generator areas, have you then got a sort of a hole that you can fire a fire extinguisher through if the fire's not quite out, because you don't want to open it up and introduce air into the equation again? Do you know where your diesel shut-off valves are and where your gas pipes run? Another one that's quite interesting is things like your raw water inlet valve. Most boats don't have fireproof pipe work from the skin fitting from the raw water intake to the impeller, where they go up through a strainer and then back down. So there's a theory, if your through hole fitting is actually located in the engine space, that you could put the fire out, but by the time the fire's gone out with the auto fire extinguisher, you may have melted the pipe work, and then you've got water ingress, but you don't want to open the engine bay steps, because then you might reignite the fire. So just have a think about, what's vulnerable in these spaces. What else do I need to protect if something's gone on? You can think about this to the nth degree, but it's just having a really good idea about what's going on. Things like early warnings, gas alarms. Gas alarms are really good because they actually pick up things like flooded lead acid batteries gassing. So they'll go off as well. So if sometimes your gas alarm goes off, it might be that the sensor's kind of out of date. Most of them last about 5 years, but it also might be that your batteries are gassing off as well. So be aware of what bits of equipment can and can't pick up. Sometimes they do dual roles, or not officially, but it does work. So we've got an example of we tend to put clean agents in rather than powder. They're a bit more expensive, but they won't trash your engine. The fire might do that, but with a powder, if your powder gets sucked into the engine, it's probably going to be catastrophic. Whereas clean agent actually just suppresses all the air out. And I've been told by engineers you can recover an engine that's been as long as it's not too damaged, to block from clean agents. And a fire port, and then some of your more complicated systems might have a manual as well as an auto discharge. So making sure the crew know exactly where that is. And then we've got, if you have a clear pipe with sort of plastic spiral, it's probably not fireproof. If it looks something like this, then it might be more like your exhaust pipe. So think about the galley, fire blanket. Again, I think this is a little bit too close in this picture to the galley. So somewhere obvious, close enough, but not over the source of the flames. If you've got cabins that are accessed through or via the cabin, via the galley, this one isn't, then think about smoke detectors as well. So the person in that cabin can, if they're asleep, can get out. And then electrical as well. So electrical fire. So I think long distance sailing, with systems constantly on, autopilots constantly working, you've got more chance of an electrical fire because you've got things that can heat up for a longer amount of time. Especially if people are going lithium and adding more electrical kit to their boat, or the boat's a little bit older, think about electrical fires as well. So that includes batteries, visual checks for frayed, corroded, pinched wires, and then breaker switches and buses that are overloaded or just old. Some battery switches can just fall apart, and breakers just fail. So, think about age and longevity as well. In an emergency, have your procedure ready. So someone spots it, wake all the crew, get them on deck. How are you going to tackle the fire? Shut all the hatches, and then think about how serious it is. So you might have one person ready in life raft, calling a mayday, multiple jobs going at once. And abandoned ships. So whilst not an emergency in itself, I think it's worth just having a think about it in case you get to the end of this particular emergency and that's your last course of action. There is the old saying, step up into a life raft, which I think if anyone's done a sea survival course, or in one of these kind of either outdoors or in one of these pools that have the waves and the lightning, and you're sat in there with a zip closed for a while, you'll definitely want to use it as a last resort. So just to recap on launching, painters should ideally, if you're doing a rally, for instance, and I'm not advocating everyone goes on a rally, it's just quite useful for reference because there's a lot of people doing it and quite good safety procedures. Certain rallies will, in their safety checks, for instance, will say you must be able to deploy your life raft in 15 seconds. So if it's in a valise, that's in a dedicated locker. If it's in a canister, it's on deck somewhere with or without a hydrostatic release. That's up to you. So generally, that means paint is secured properly to a strong point. And think about when you're launching it, trying to deploy it on the leeward side if that's possible. And then understand how your life raft actually works. How long's the painter line? It's written on the top of it. Some are 8 meters, some are 12 meters, some are even longer. How high can you drop it from? That's probably not an issue on most yachts, but knowing information about it. Ideally, you've got the right spec as well. So we'd be putting on an ISO 9650-1 Type A, so that'll do you down to freezing. And your decision whether you have an over 24-hour kit within the life raft, which in a canister and a valise will make it pack a bit bigger, or whether you have an under 24-hour kit with it, and then you make up a grab bag after that. So if it's under 24-hour, just remember that there's no water and no food in it. So that's what you're making up in your grab bag as well. So being aware of your contents, don't just take a life raft and go, yeah, that's me done. You need to know what's in there, how you're going to use it, if it's enough for what you're doing as well. So first person in the raft, the grab bag. So work it out. Normally it's the strongest. And then once all crew are cut cut the painter, stream the drogue, and dry the raft. So this is where you see survival courses come in helpful, because you can actually practice that. And then what goes with you? So my preference is generally it doesn't matter if it's grab bag for the ISO kit is in or outside the life raft, but I will always have a ship's grab bag as well. So I would actually put things like the EPIRB in on passage, because then it's all in one place to grab, and I put it near the life raft. Things like your sat phone fully charged, handheld VHF fully charged, extra food, protein bars, any medication that the crew have said that they'll need, passports, credit cards, extra water, electronic flares. I think they're fantastic in a life raft. In the middle of the ocean, no one's going to think that it's not a flare. It's just a big red flashing light, so they're going to be attracted by it. And also, you're not going to set your own house on fire. And sun cream if you need it. So really sit down and think what you might need in a grab bag and what's going to be useful to you. In summary, so I think we should all, and I try and do this as much as I can as well, practice what I preach, make a plan and brief your crew before leaving. I think that's difficult when you've got lots of different crew on board and it's a cruise and everyone's trying to keep it light and happy. So things like laminated copies, go and have a read of this and do it in stages is really helpful. And it helps you when you're doing your safety briefing to actually not forgetting anything as well. Because, trying to do everything on board at once, you're going to forget a few things. I think it's essential before you enter in any emergency that you carry the right kit and keep it well maintained. And then, it's useless if everyone doesn't know how to use it. So crew should know how to use all emergency equipment properly. So, using a flare, you could do more harm than good if someone sets a flare off and it's they don't know the type of flare and they're firing a parachute flare off inside the boat or near crew and they're not wearing gloves. And then overall, easier said than done. Try and remain calm and positive. There's loads of useful kit out there. Every boat that I get on, someone's found some gadget or something that's pretty cool. So just keep amassing it, keep learning. That we've mentioned most of these already today. They might get you out of trouble one day. One more big up for the stowage plan. Thank you very much. Hopefully a flood of questions.
Hey, thanks, Will. Thank you very, very much. You've packed a lot into an hour and 10 minutes there. Well done. A well-earned drink. The Behan Gifford has got her hand up, so I've asked her to come in and join as a panelist if she can. That would be great. I've got a couple of points just while she's connecting. Okay, she's not going to take the camera.
Fair enough.
Because the time in Japan. Okay, she's dialed in from Okinawa or somewhere. So presumably she's still in bed. So she's saying that satellite. Well, you can see the question there. Will, can you?
I can see the question. Yeah. I think. Yeah, I mean, I've thought about this a lot, and Starlink's brilliant. Everyone's putting it on. And it does work, and you get faster speeds in at home, but where it I think it misses out is that voice communication with its own power source. So for me, and you can get second-hand ones out there, and you will be able to sell them. So you won't completely lose all your money, and you can get credit that will last for a while, and it might be a bit more expensive, but if you're only using it in an emergency, then fair enough. So yeah, all of these, the InReach, the Iridium Go, the Exec, they aren't in the GMDSS system, and also they need a power supply, or they need, so a SATCOM phone tucked away in your grab bag, for me, is the ultimate. I mean, everyone's got to decide their own risk, and everyone's on a budget, and it's easy for me to say because a lot of the time I spend other people's money. But I think it's, that's the way I'd go. I don't know what you run on your boat, Simon.
Yeah, no. Do you want to unshare your screen so your camera takes
Oh,
up?
why not there?
Yes, there we go.
Yeah.
That's great. Excellent. So no, we have this year. We've always had Iridium Go, which acts as a sat phone, obviously, but we decided not to spend the money on that this year. So we just had an InReach as our backup to Starlink. So you've got email stroke text communication, but not voice communication. But I just want to give a shout out to the way Starlink's been used. I'm sure it's in every ocean, but in the Pacific, is people are using it for a lot of community support. So that one to many type reach out in an emergency or a semi-emergency is actually has been really important in the last few seasons in boats around us who've run into steering difficulties or lost their mast because they've been able to scrounge fuel to extend their motoring range, take on extra crew if somebody's been injured or if they've lost their auto helm. Um,
Mm.
that support from the cruising community, or I guess on a rally, is a really important part. And traditionally, that
And
would have been
how are they doing that? Starlink's the sort of comms, but is it WhatsApp groups or is it,
yeah,
what
WhatsApp.
are they? Yeah,
99% of it WhatsApp. So small amount of SSB. A few of us were enthusiastically, nostalgically reinventing our SSB skills this year, but
yeah,
uh, the, the WhatsApp groups are becoming they're never going to replace the EPUBs, and they shouldn't replace the EPUBs, but they are for conjuring support out of nowhere. They are remarkable. There are many, many examples of that now. So if you need medical advice, sure, talk to Aberdeen or whoever's at the end of the satellite phone. But it might just be there's a nurse 20 miles away and you can rendezvous and put the nurse on board for a while. That sort of thing is happening all the time now,
yeah,
which used to happen a bit with SSB, but now it's so much more accessible. There's a lovely example this year of a boat that completely lost its rudder about 300 miles north of New Zealand. And they jury rigged, but they weren't really making much progress. There was some bad weather brewing behind them, and they put out an SSB. The rescue control centers were all aware of this, but of course they're only interested in saving the people and not the boat. Um, so
sure.
so the people weren't in danger, but the boat was certainly in danger. So they put out an SSB call, and actually that was picked up by a boat at anchor very close to where we were that actually pulled the anchor up motored 300 miles north to go and tow them back down, which is an amazing. Sorry,
That is
Sally's correcting
that
that.
is huge.
Sally's
Yeah.
correcting
No,
that.
I think you're right. One thing that
That
I
was
was
SSB.
that I found interesting, I noted when I was sailing this last week or so, when we Starlink was on all the time. So when we were just sailing along, we had it on the inverter,
Mhm.
and then when we switched to the generator, it obviously switched power supplies. So there was a good sort of often maybe 10 minutes before everything kicked back in. It powered up, then it linked up, then the Wi-Fi got going. So I'm an absolute advocate for it as a on a cruising boat. Where I'm sort of going with the SATCOM system is just like the belt and braces approach. I think the sort of backup. If you had an emergency and the Starlink wasn't on, you had to get into life raft really quickly. I'd like a sat phone with me, but I'm quite a careful individual. So
Yeah,
so
we have the Starlink Mini for the first time this year, and that we have a Pelican case for it, so it's waterproof. And we've actually got an emergency power supply, which is just
okay,
DeWalt electric drill batteries,
oh fantastic,
which we've always got half a dozen of those on the boat, and so
yeah,
you have actually got power in your life raft if you need it. That's the theory. Hope never to use
yeah,
it, but
yeah. Wow,
and
works.
those you buy those connectors off Amazon for £5 or thereabouts. A few more questions on there.
Yeah,
Do you want to work your way down those?
yeah. Got the lithium one. That is a tricky one. There's not anything out there that I know that will put it out once it's going. I give you an example. We have just taken on an Aquastar actually to manage, and we were talking about coding it, and we can't get it through the UK coding because it's got lithium batteries on, and they won't code it. So I think from an authority point of view, no one likes lithium batteries. From a cruiser point of view, or from a risk point of view, insurance, that sort of thing. But loads of cruisers have got it, and we're getting it put on every boat. But there are lithium fire extinguishers out there, but I'm not aware, speaking to electricians and sort of people in the know in the safety environment, I don't think anything touches it once it's getting going. I think the only way you can do it is in a steel box and drop it out the bottom of the boat or something.
Yeah, you're talking about an outboard motor battery going on fire or something like that. You're not talking about your house batteries going on fire because they don't support combustion. The lithium iron phosphate batteries are pretty much non-combustible as far as I'm aware. The wiring is, but not the battery.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's the foil boards and the e-bikes and the danger, aren't they, having the charges on those?
Yeah. I think there was one insurance uh, that we got recently for a boat, and they said, only everything like that has to be charged with someone on the boat and on charging heat-proof mats, things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Recommendations for double-handed boats to alert the off-watch crew of a man overboard situation or end in kit.
I think that there's a couple of things that I've seen. You can get the like the geo sort of tagging watches that people wear, or they're not a watch, but they go on your wrist. And so you can get those in various forms where if you go outside of a zone, then either the other person wearing it or some sort of unit goes off in the boat. The AIS MOB one that you carry, like the Ocean Signal one, if you can program that with the MMSI number, and that should set your DSC radio off as well. So that would alert you. So I think there are various things out there that would alert you. I'm sure someone's come up with something to kill the engine or autopilot or do something, but I don't think there's anything on the market that does that. It'd be someone with a Raspberry Pi and a computer that knows what they're doing or something. But yeah, there's various things out there.
I'll just try and bring Neil in because he's often will come in to talk. He's got a question there. So promote to panelist. Neil, can you join us with your camera or your microphone? There we go.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Loud and clear. Go ahead, Neil.
Hi, Neil.
Yeah, just hi. First of all, emphasize the importance of not running preventers to the tow rail. You mentioned it, and I'd really like to reinforce your point there that was is really important. You see people doing it a lot. It should always go to the bow. Coming back to communications, as I mentioned in the chat, I think an EPIRB, of course, but Starlink backed up with a InReach or similar that you can take with you in the life raft. I really think it's the modern way to do it, and GMDSS just hasn't caught up. It's been quite disappointing, our attempts at communicating with MRCCs on this. The usual answer is it's not GMDSS, we're not interested. Simon mentioned one example. There's several more around of when Starlink's been used really effectively in emergencies and much more effectively than the traditional means.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have any comments on that.
No, I think fair enough. I think there's different. My thing is probably, I suppose, the sat phone would be the traditional way of doing it. I suppose the main point is having a backup to Starlink that would, that you can take with you if you had to get to a life raft. So yeah, I really like that idea about the drill batteries and setting it up in like a Pelican case, like waterproof case. I think if you thought about it, something that you could take with you that's running off its own power source that you can actually use to contact is yeah, that's definitely the way to do it.
Going back to my hobby horse too, Will, about sometimes I'm cards on the table. I'm a medic or an ex-medic, and I've seen some pretty crass advice given out by rescue centres sometimes who have been using medical advisors based 2,000 miles away who don't really have specific advice about what it's like to transfer somebody from a yacht onto a passing cruise ship. Um, uh, uh, it is really useful to be able to communicate with other medics in the region, and that's another big shout out for WhatsApp, because medical emergencies or medical semi-emergencies are really common, and if you can get advice directly from somebody who's understands it, and they're maybe 20 miles away or 50 miles away, it's a huge improvement over. A classic example is when we went to the Ark in 1999. An elderly guy had a heart attack, and the advice from Aberdeen was to transfer him onto a passing freighter, which was, the guy didn't die in transit, but they abandoned the process halfway through. And a very pragmatic solution then was to put a nurse onto his boat, and so there was somebody else other than to help crew and look after him for the rest of the voyage, which is a much more sensible solution than to try and get this guy who's just had a heart attack 8 meters up a rolling deck.
Yeah. Really finish them
Reaching
off.
out to boats in the area, whether it's whatever the communication method is actually a good way of sharing the problem, and you never know what comes out of the woodwork. I think that's
Yeah, for sure. Fascinating.
Anybody else got any questions? Somebody's got a hand up. Who's that? They haven't. I'm imagining that. We haven't got anybody else in the chat, I think. A couple of points I wanted to just mention. Loss of steering, huge issue in the Pacific over the last couple of years. Our insurers, because we sail double-handed, were adamant that we should have a hydrovane on the boat. And of course, that is an emergency rudder, which we've seen used a couple of times in the course of the last 2 years to give some semblance of emergency steering, and it's already bolted onto the back of your boat, which is handy. And of course, it's a backup to the autopilot as well if you don't use it as your primary method of steering. So we're big advocates for having a hydrovane on the back or anything else that acts as a secondary rudder. John buoys, yeah, I just wanted to raise our experience of that. We had a John buoy on our push bit for several years, took it in to get it serviced, and hadn't realised it had to be kept covered. So water had got into it and trashed it. You always think because it's in a valise and it's designed to be outdoors that it would be fine, but actually it was completely useless. So so get a cover for your John buoy would be my would be my advice. Um, the other bits of medical advice I've seen really botched really is what to do with dead bodies on the boat, particularly in the tropics, where you have terrestrial medical advisors giving advice that might work for a cargo ship, but probably not great advice for a small boat with 5 people on board. So just be careful sometimes that the advice you get and the provenance of it, just because it's coming from a rescue organisation, might not mean that it's absolutely tapered to your situation. If you're in a small boat, when the rescue organisation is usually dishing out advice to cruise liners, etc. I'm just thinking of some friends who had a death on board, and they were advised to put the body into the forepeak and sail 5 days on to St. Lucia, and that was a nightmare for the whole boat.
Jeez. Easy to say on the phone when you're sat and on land. That would not be nice on a boat.
Sure. We've got Angie and Alex. I haven't read your comment, but I'll try and bring you in, Angie, Alex, if I can. Promote to panelist. I think you're dialed in from Switzerland, so hopefully you'll be able to join us. Yeah, go ahead, Alex. Great.
Hi there. You see
Got you.
Simon.
Hey guys.
Hi there. Yes, we are dialing in from Switzerland this evening. Yep. Yeah. Will, thanks a lot for the talk. I just asked a quick question, something we've wondered about often over the years, to kind of with the medical training to go beyond the kind of standard first aid, kind of 1 day first aid course. I wondered if you or you, Simon, or anyone else here had kind of any specific recommendations for courses that could be suitable for.
Yeah, well, I mean, Simon will probably be able to tell you more. From my point of view, it'd be the next one up would be like the MCA, the 4-day proficiency in first aid course, which after you, as I'm aware, after your sort of 1 day course, that's the next one up. Probably don't want to go down Simon's route and do a full medical degree. That might take a bit too long and curb your cruising. But yeah, that's the next step up that I've seen as the most relevant, and I think it's, you know, normally it's about 600 quid 4 days, so it's expensive, but it's not prohibitive. I think, you know, and then there's companies that do that then offer, and again, as I understand, when I crossed, my father-in-law was a GP and still working, so he was the one on the sat phone with a number, and then he helped us put the medical kit together. You can get all this done by companies, but of course it costs more. But I think if you do something like the 4-day course and then do some more research yourself, you can do it much more on a budget. I don't know what you think, Simon.
Well, yeah, it was much easier when I was working to get medication, and I used to provide prescriptions for friends or OCC members or whatever. But I'm no longer on the medical register, so I can't do that anymore. But courses, North American friends speak very highly. I can't remember the name of the course now, but they used to speak very highly of the medical course they run in North America, and the Cruising Club of America is very geared up to producing training for couples that are sailing, in terms of getting everybody trained up to medical. We're in New Zealand. Well, we're actually in Wales at the moment, but our boat's in New Zealand, and some really significant courses there for people, and providing them with first aid kits. But that's quite a long way to go for you guys.
If we make it before we've done a course, then better late than never. But
it's probably cheaper to fly to New Zealand to do the course there.
Just don't hurt yourself before you get there. That's
yeah, exactly.
So where are you guys heading to this summer? You're both still in Scotland, Alex and Angie?
Yes, our boat's still in Scotland, and we're not sure yet, but possibly up to Norway, and then
back down south, a bit warmer, I think.
So Denmark is warm, yeah?
No, I'm not sure. No, further south than Denmark, yeah. No.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so slightly more tropical, where you don't need a wetsuit when going swimming or diving. Yeah.
That's great. That's nice.
Too many summers in the north.
Yeah.
I think time for some warm weather.
Well, I'm conscious that time is knocking you on and you probably need a break, but thank you very, very much indeed for taking on a huge topic, I have to say. So knowing where to draw the line in terms of detail and nuance is fantastic. So well done on doing it, and thank you very much for giving us the benefit of your experience. Great way to learn about what can go wrong is by inspecting other people's boats. I think that's a real masterpiece.
Yeah, learning from other people's mistakes. It's a much cheaper option.
So, I mean, how well prepared are boats generally? You know, if you've got 250 boats that you're checking over in Las Palmas at the beginning of the arc, how many of those are neophyte ocean cruisers? How many of them have done it half a dozen times before? How many are completely ill prepared, or how many of them actually run into problems? Do you have any statistics for that sort of stuff?
I think from a prep point of view, it's interesting. This year we did a preparation survey to see how long people were prepping for. I actually can't say too much about it because we're going to do it as an article in Yachting World. It's going to come out in
oh, don't worry, they won't be watching. You'll be fine.
May, I think so. But it's interesting how the range of how long people are prepping. You know, you've got people that have been thinking about it for 5-6 years,
Right.
and people that have got the boat in May, or the latest I heard was September, and they're crossing in November. And it's all about, you know, the unknown unknowns, people that don't. It's that vicious circle. If they haven't done a crossing before, they don't know what they don't know, and so you know, I would say 25% of checks that we do would pass first time, and there might not. I mean, and it's not stringent. It is. It's life rafts, life jackets, things like that, but it's not the full picture of safety. I think the rally stuff, you know, people join because they want safety in numbers and they want support, and so I think sometimes, you know, people independently think about their safety. Great, they pass and are really well prepared. Some people aren't. I mean, some of the scary ones. I once had someone ask me if they wanted to use their life jacket, did they have to unzip it first? Which I thought was quite a low level of personal safety 2 days before crossing the Atlantic. And then I once did a check on a life raft where they secured the painter to a strong point, but with 2 cable ties. And so I had to sort of tell them that in you know, this close to the equator and where they're going with high UV, that's probably going to go ping quite soon. I mean, they put 2 cable ties on, but one for backup. But then there's people that I get on the boat and I spend there about 2 hours on the boat after the check, because I'm learning from them, because they are so well prepared and they've done so much research, and their boat is just fitted out perfectly. So that's part of the reason why I signed up in 2017, because I thought there's got to be loads of people that I learned stuff from as well.
Yeah, good. Great. Will, we'll call it a day there, but thank you very, very much indeed for putting your hand up to do this talk for us tonight. Always very thought-provoking, and thanks everybody for joining in, and hope it's been a good audience for you as well, Will.
Yeah. What else do you do on a January night? You know, you can't go sailing, so you might as well talk about it. Great stuff.
Good night.
Thank you very much.
Good night.
Cheers, guys.
Night. And